Dr. Christopher, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. And what I'll be talking about today is basically forecast uncertainty, given the recent information we have seen from the blue chip forecasters and the survey of professional forecasters from the Philly Fed. In addition, I will sort of get to the point of what is that uncertainty, where is it mounting, and at least in my opinion, a lot of it's mounting from the supply chain. Of course, there's other things like Fed policy, government policy, but I'm focusing a little bit on the nitty-gritty numbers from NEPA, the National Income and Product Account, but in addition to some of the numbers that feed into BEA's construct of NEPA from the from census mostly. So without much further ado, let's just sort of walk through the blue chip numbers that have been put out. And if you go to the February release, now the blue chip numbers come out, it's about 60 forecasters. They're, sort of aggregated in some way, a median, a mean, a diffusion index is sort of done on various metrics. Unfortunately, they don't do employment. They do GDP, unemployment, Fed funds, etc. I'm going to focus on GDP and on the unemployment rate. And if you can notice here in February, the blue chip comes out typically on the 10th if it's on a weekday, and it might incorporate the first, second, or third estimate of GDP for the quarter before. But in addition, it may have the employment numbers involved for the preceding month. Okay. So here in February, things seem relatively normal. And then in March, there's a little bit of anxiety mounting, but as things got locked down, you can sort of notice here that the consensus in blue did mark down a little bit. But then in April, you see a sudden shift down, okay? And have in mind that this has, most likely it has the March employment numbers in it, and it also has the third estimate of Q4, but a lot of monthly tracking numbers, et cetera. So you sort of see the second quarter going down quite a bit. Okay, so now when the first estimate of the first quarter comes out, and that's encapsulated in the May numbers, as well as the April employment report, you can sort of see there's a huge, strong shift down. If you all recall, negative 23% for annualized rate on GDP is not. It was nowhere near that. And then it sort of keeps on marking down, but then it sort of stabilizes in July. And then in the August release, this is inclusive of the annual revisions of NEPA. And you also have the advanced estimate or first estimate of the second quarter, and you can sort of see it settled at 32.9%, about 33%. And the second and third estimate, has been in that neighborhood. Now you notice at 32%, around 32, 33% on the second quarter. What happens over here in the third quarter is that the consensus is around 19%. And as more information comes through, and there was pretty strong misses on the employment front, the third quarter does sort of stabilize at around 30%. Now that's a pretty strong number, and you can sort of see we're going to take an annual look at this, and I'm going to go through this relatively fast. So in February of 2020, a release of the blue chip, this is sort of what you're sort of seeing, and you can sort of see how this sort of plays out. Let's look at the unemployment rate on the blue chip, and I'll do this briefly. you can sort of notice as things play out per release, things start getting lower and lower. Let's just go back to around April. So May, you sort of see a peak. As the numbers stabilize, things get downgraded further and further. And there's reasons for that. Let's sort of look at what the blue chip is sort of saying. What the blue chip is sort of saying with respect to when does the crossover in GDP happen. That means when does it sort of when does it reach its recent peak of the fourth quarter of 2019? If you look in February, you'll notice right here, this is the 2021 column. Everyone thought that it was just going to continue growing. By the time you get to April, consensus was that you would reach crossover by the fourth quarter of 21. Only until October, as we sort of solidify our the view of the third quarter, is it getting much stronger, and the crossover has been pushed over sooner than compared to other blue chip survey releases. Okay, so a way of looking at this is looking at the diffusion indexes of the blue chip, and let's just focus on on the GDP numbers, on the unemployment numbers for 2020. The unemployment rate diffusion index and the unemployment rate is the annual average, and you can sort of notice here that they were marking down GDP up until about April, the April release, and then they started marking it up consistently with a little bit of a lull in July. The unemployment number, was getting marked up quite a bit, and then it's been systematically going down. If you remember in July, and this is the comparison, the diffusion index is, how many forecasters are upping their number or, lowering their number compared to the previous month. So basically, the question in terms of forecast uncertainty is what sort of changed here, what were the misses, etc. I'm going to present some of the research I've been doing on this, but I'm going to use the survey of professional forecasters. The problem with the blue chip, it just gives you the point estimate of the forecasters, and there's about 60 of them. The survey of professional forecasters, each individual forecaster gives a subjective distribution of their GDP number or employment number, etc. Okay, and it's in certain range buckets. So if you see here from the survey of professional forecasters, and it's a quarterly release. It's usually set out at the first estimate of the prior quarter of the release, and you can sort of see here in the first quarter release of the survey of professional forecasters, this is where the distribution was, and then by the second release, it shifted quite a bit, and then it sort of moved up a little bit with a little bit of of a center right around here. And this is for the annual number. In the appendix of this, I have more things on blue chip and more things on the survey of professional forecasters. And what I'm trying to measure is I'm trying to use some Bayesian entropy measures to measure the uncertainty of this and some of the forecast error involved. Where was the major miss? And many professional forecasters have admitted to this. I'm not going to name any names, but anyone who subscribes to their services sort of mentions this. Basically, there was an over-reliance on the weekly unemployment insurance, and where it happened is they thought that the insurance claims was a good tracker for the unemployment rate or employment. It sort of overshot a bit, especially if you look at continuing claims. And then for the most part, the employment numbers, or the unemployment rate started coming down, and the employment numbers grew quite a bit after April. And if you look at, let's say, Bloomberg surveys of one period ahead, distributions of this, it was pretty strong misses. Part of the explanation of that miss to be the over-reliance on the, on the claims, and there's a lot of noise in that data. The release from last week had some noise coming in from California, and that, it's in the mainstream newspapers and media. If the forecaster relied more on like home-based numbers, you can sort of see the turnaround in terms of opening, or this is the econ tracker. You can sort of see the turnaround sort of happening in mid-April, okay? And now there's a low. Now there's other metrics here you can look at from econ tracker or home base, and that was a better indicator. But I guess first-time forecasters using these new data sets for the first time wanted to go to more traditional methods and maybe put an over-reliance on the claim. So let's sort of briefly describe the bullwhip effect and some of the issues that might be facing forecast uncertainty. Basically, these quotes are taken from an article I wrote about 10 years ago after when I started working at IHS Markit. A lot of it was related to work I did at FedEx Services in terms of supply chain economics. But basically, for those who don't know what the bullwhip effect is, it's the magnification of order fluctuations at each upstream point in a supply chain. And it's usually by the supply chain folks or the supply chain gurus, it's usually referring to a particular company's experience. So the consumer does something over here, and then the inventory is over here, and orders, etc. So it propagates. Some work that I've done, and there are a few economists who've been looking at this, most notably Ed Leamer, many years ago. Scott Shue of the Boston Fed, as well, is basically, you can aggregate this up to a national economy. It doesn't always fit exactly right, where you have the retailer does something, or demand or consumption does something, and then the manufacturers, and then at least according to the article I wrote about 10 years ago for Supply Chain Quarterly, I also added China at the end here as a exporter-importer. So let's look at some data and sort of try to believe in this. And you'll notice here, the red line is real manufacturing, sales or shipments. By the way, I don't have time to describe how these variables are constructed from BEA. But you can notice here, manufacturing moved down more in the dot-com recession than, let's say, retail sales or wholesale sales. Sort of, it's a tough call between, for the Great Recession, but this recession is quite different, where they all moved down quite a bit, and I'm going to show some graphs a little bit more. Here's also retail sales and retail inventories, and it's in nominal units. These are in real units. A disclosure here: the way this is constructed, not by me, but by BEA, is they take the CPI and they deflate the retail sales numbers they get from census. Okay, so here, even in nominal units, you sort of see it to a certain degree that the inventory decline is pretty great. But then in the recession, as let's call it the COVID recession, which is quite different, and it is to a certain degree a consumption recession, you can sort of see quite a bit of action here, and it's very different, and we're going to describe that a little bit more in detail. In the next slide, here you see food and beverage stores. Food has become very important. It's in terms of getting to the consumer, and you'll notice here that the inventories, the inventory shot down a bit. It's sort of coming back, and then the sales just went off the roof, and a lot of it was e-commerce sales, and we'll get into that a little bit later. I have a few graphs to sort of display that. Here's the inventory to sales ratio. I constructed this myself, so there might be some issues. It's not in chain-weighted terms or anything like that, but you can sort of see here that it was hovering right about this level between 0.75 and 0.825, and then it just took a certain hit, and it's sort of coming up quite a bit. So this is a lot of uncertainty, and where you're going to sort of see this is in the inventory numbers coming from NEPA. But let me just first explain that this is the e-commerce retail sales growth by channel. It's experimental data from the from Census on a quarterly basis, and you see this food and beverage number in the second quarter on e-commerce just went off the roof, and e-commerce is just growing at tremendous length, and it's part of what's sort of causing this change in the supply chain, and also in the typical patterns we sort of see in the bullwhip effect. So this is a graph done by someone on my team here at DOB, and what we basically did is we took the industrial production of manufacturing makes-based, we indexed it to its December value, and then we sort of tracked it through time. And we did the same thing to retail sales and food services. And you can sort of see here, according to the bullwhip effect, this is not exactly supposed to happen. I am using a nominal value for retail sales and food services, but for the IP, it's a real number, a real index. So there's just forgive the inflation that might be incurring in here, and then you can sort of see that retail sales came back nicely, has surpassed its pre-COVID level, where the industrial production is still struggling. Now, there's some other things going on. There's trade conflicts that were happening pre-COVID, and some other things like that. And let's sort of say, well, where is the first estimate of the third quarter is coming out tomorrow. Atlanta Fed, as of this morning, is at 37%. IHS Market is standing at around 33.8% for a third quarter GDP growth. But you can sort of see here, for the next few quarters, the real change in private inventory is just tremendous of what might happen, with the numbers coming out over the next few quarters. Now, I would like to thank everybody for this, and now